So I think we should probably start by defining what is a design build for listeners who are not familiar with that terminology.
Yeah. So if you're a client and you're embarking on a project, there's two paths you can take. One is the traditional route of project delivery and professionals and teamwork, and that is you hire an architect and a contractor, and you hire them separately. So the architect has their own practice, their own business, and that's one contract. Then you hire a general contractor or builder, sometimes they're called, and they're their own business and they're separate things. And that's the traditional route. So you have the three legs of the stool are the architect, contractor, and client.
Yeah.
There's other professionals involved, but those are oftentimes the three biggest one. And then interior designers kind of in the mix as well, fairly often. Sometimes the architect and interior designer are one shop. But that's that route. The other path is the design build path, and it's different because in that case, you are hiring one team under one company to do both the architecture and the building side of it. And the reason why it's appealing is because it is potentially less headache for the client, right? Communication becomes simpler. I don't have to worry about, as a client, these architect and contractor pointing fingers at each other. I don't have to worry about managing them. I can just talk to this one project manager, this one entity, this one company who's going to do everything.
Yeah.
The buck stops there. It's one-stop shop. And there's also this, ideally, the idea is that there's an efficiency to the process because it's internal. They can work together more efficiently. So the whole process of design and construction becomes more efficient. And those are probably the biggest selling points for the design build route and why clients are drawn to it.
So now that sounds great, right? On paper. If I'm a
on
client,
paper, it
I don't
sounds
have to find the right architect, find the right contractor, make sure they get along, they do work well and whatever. And also oftentimes it's the first time they work together. So it's kind of more of a risk.
Can be a risk, yeah.
Versus you go with a company that does it all. Well, they probably have their stuff figured out, right? So why, I guess we have probably a few reasons as to why design build is probably not so great.
Yeah.
What would be the first one?
As you said, despite all of those benefits, which are plausible and they could exist, however, in reality, 99% of the time, they don't really exist for a client. And here's the first reason why. Most design build companies are not actually design build companies.
What are they?
Because a true design build company would have licensed, professional, experienced, expert architects and designers and licensed, experienced, and expert contractors also under the same company, under the same umbrella.
So if they don't have those people, then who are part of their team?
Most of the design build companies are led by contractors or a contractor. They're founded by a contractor. And on the architect side, right, they don't have a licensed architect. They have an architectural designer, which is a fake term. It's not a real term. And when people say, I have an architectural designer or I am an architectural designer, that's code for I'm not an architect, but I have some architecture training, but I'm not a licensed architect. So these design build companies, they have architectural designers or designers, but even then, that's not really true. What they have is a draftsperson who can draw plans. And most of the time, that draftsperson, maybe they have some architecture background, but they have barely any experience. And I've seen it a number of times too, where that person's not actually an employee of their company. They're a 1099er freelancer person that they use to draft up plans, right? So this is also the issue with the architecture profession and also the issue for clients, right? These terms of designer, architectural designer, architect, all are easily blurred by people who are not architects, right? So it's very easy for me to, if I were a contractor to claim, I'm a design build company. Oh yeah, I have an architectural designer. And most clients would be like, okay, well, that's probably like an architect or whatever.
Sometimes they don't even bother saying an architectural designer. Sometimes, we have architects in-house.
We have architects in-house. And so I guess that's the first takeaway, right? If you're a client and you're talking to a design build company, one of the first questions I would ask is, do you have licensed architects in your office, in your business? And if so, how many years have they been practicing and what have they done?
Yeah.
Right. Now, if you hire an architect in the traditional project delivery method, just a standalone architect, well, then they're an architect. You're just less concerned about like their experience because they're an architect. Yeah. So that's the first thing is most design build companies are not truly design build companies. They're more what we would call build design companies, or they're build companies with a drafts person that's, again, some freelance younger individual that they hire to do plans. And that's a big problem because so many clients, they think they're getting, again, both experts equally in one company, and they just aren't. So you can't judge a cover by its book. You can't judge a book by its cover. However, it tends to be that the design build companies that are founded and led by a contractor solely tend to be more of what I'm describing compared to if you find a design build company that was founded and is led by an architect, then for sure you're going to have both sides of it, right? So that's something I would keep in mind as I'm looking for.
Well, it's like if you're an architect starting a design build, and let's say you had maybe like a site super that you hired, and that's like your construction expert, or like a tile guy, a tile subcontractor that you hired to be part of like your construction team. Well, I'm not doubting his expertise. It's what he does specifically with tile installation, but like a whole building, probably not the expert that you would want to be leading the effort. So it's a little bit like, I think it's good when people are trying to do like those one-stop shop where they know that they don't have a certain experience, therefore they bring people with some of that experience to leverage, their company. I think it's very smart. Like that's the route to go. But you do have to hire the expert and not like the lower level expert.
That's also the issue, right? And this kind of gets to the fundamental differences between architects and contractors and our professions, because they are very different professions. What contractors do, it's very difficult. There's a lot of liability, but it's also very quantifiable. It's very clear and easy to understand, right? It's not conceptually difficult to understand. You pay the contractor for the cost of materials and labor, plus their overhead and profit, and they build the building. And they're supposed to do it on time and within a certain budget, ideally, and it's supposed to be of high quality. It's all quantifiably clear things. Architecture is a bit of a weird thing because, yes, we produce drawings, and that's, a physical, solid thing we can imagine. But a lot of the value of the architect has to do with design. And design is a much more elusive thing. And it's easy to kind of gloss over. It's easy for a lot of people to think they can design because it's not as quantifiable, right? It's not as clear as, well, that painting, detail edge is not cleaner. It is clean. Design is this very debatable thing. And so I think as a result of that, it's easy for some contractors to think, well, like we can just find someone who's, again, a draftsperson and it'll be good enough. And it's a detriment to the clients who think that they are getting an actual architectural service and design service. So and also, like you were saying, you can bring on the professionals and the experts that you need to help you. But the reality is that a company is greatly impacted by whoever is at the very top. And architects and contractors, for the most part, are very different people, and we think differently. Our jobs are different, right? Architects are rooted in the why questions of like, why are we making this building the way it is? Why should it be covered in zinc versus wood or something else? We're creatives. Contractors are really good at executing the how and the what. And so fundamentally, if you have a design build or whatever company, and you have, let's say, call it the left and right side of the brains, just for sake of conversation, and you have one person on either side, or one person on one side that's leading the company, that affects everything in the company and the values of the company. So that's why when you have a design build practice that is led by, let's say it's one person and they are an architect, the values of the architect trickle through down to everything else.
Well, it comes down to basically what you know, like your roots. And if your roots are in design, and then the way you're going to think about things would be more toward that than the roots that you're not from. Yeah. It's just natural. I think there is also something interesting about, thinking of the efficiency of hiring a design build and knowing who is making the team of the design build. Because ultimately, why do clients decide to go with the design build route? It's for efficiency in time, efficiency in process, but also they're thinking it's going to be cheaper because I'm just going to that one company, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if the team that's part of the design build doing the design is not suiting what you're looking for, you're going to have to end up hiring a separate architect or designer to jump in to fix the project. And it's actually going to cost you a lot more money.
And time and headache.
And time and effort, because now you're trying to do a more traditional route, pairing people, especially the design build company, to work in a way that's not their business. That's not how they function.
There's a lot of things within that example you've given that we can unpack. So taking a step back, I guess the question is for some people listening so far, they're wondering, well, should I even bother with a design build company? Because it sounds like for the most part, it's going to be a headache. I would say it depends also on your kind of value system, right? Yeah. If you're more in line with, let's call it project efficiency, if design is very far down on your list of priorities, like truly, honestly with yourself, you're like, I don't really care about design. I just want to do this house, this addition, this whatever it is, and be done as quickly as possible. And I have just like 3 requirements in terms of design and program, and that's it. Yeah. Then this design build route with a contractor at the helm and what I've described is probably a really good fit for you. Yeah. However, if you're a person who cares about design and you follow design magazines and blogs and you're more particular about what you want, or you just really love great design, then the typical design build, which is not really a design build, which is led by a contractor, is 110% not for you, to your point. And we ourselves have been through that with clients, and we've seen it actually almost countless times. Clients, and that's why we're doing this recording, clients hire a design build company thinking they're getting all this great design service. They get months into the process and they become very frustrated because the designer, architectural designer as part of the design build company, they're not listening to them. They're not listening. They don't get it. The stuff they're proposing also doesn't make sense to me. I don't feel heard. I don't feel confident in what's being shown. I don't understand the drawings, and all of the problems that you can imagine, after you hire a service professional come up. And then they call us. They somehow find us and they're like, hey, so I'm in a bit of a pickle. Here's the situation. And sometimes they're further along and sometimes they're less along. And then they ask us to look at, to basically do kind of like an analysis or a diagnosis of what's taken place so far in terms of design and process and everything else. And we have to kind of unpack it and explain to them why they're feeling these issues, and that most of the time what they're feeling and their intuitions are correct. I'm like, yeah, this is not good. This is a problem, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we have taken over projects when it's gotten to that point, when the clients just feel so frustrated because, again, if you care about design, projects are expensive, right? And even if this is a second home, you don't want to spend millions of dollars on a house to end up having something you don't like because the designer, the first portion of it, the first third of the timeline, couldn't do a good job. Yeah. So I think that also gets back to, like, if you are a client and you're embarking on a project, being very honest with yourself about what you want out of the design is incredibly important. And I will say, it is fairly common for clients to say, well, I'm not super picky about the design. I have a few parameters. But once they get into the process and everything becomes more serious, right? They're making final decisions about the paint color or the tile or the room layout, the shape of the house, whatever, and they're realizing the cost of everything, then they start to pay more attention and they become much more specific, which is totally fine and natural and normal. But again, if you think you're going to end up actually caring that much about the project, then no, you can't have some architectural designer designing the house for you. It doesn't work.
Yeah, we could actually speak to the first person in this scenario where we did jump in a project where a design build company was hired. They were just not getting the design sensibility of the client, what they were expecting. Yeah. So, they probably had the technical knowledge and team to do the construction part, but the design aspect of it, they were just not getting it. And it's kind of frustrating for a client because they've already invested in working with this company. So, like, let's say letting them go and starting new with someone else feels like you're kind of like starting from zero again, and you've wasted a bunch of time and money. And so a lot of time clients don't really want to go that route where they just like cut it off and start new, because they understand it just, it takes more effort and more everything. So in this case, the client was trying to be nice and not let go the other firm. So they brought us on board to basically help move the situation along and get the design that they wanted, which was one way to approach it. I think in the end, it worked. It was probably not the easiest thing for everybody because, again, that design build company, their business model is everything is internal. They have control over everything in the project.
Yeah.
So now you're asking a separate entity, an external entity, to jump in and kind of like shuffle everything that they have put in place in the way they operate to operate differently, which in terms of business operation, it does not make sense. Like that's a different business model. So it's very difficult. And from the architect or designer that you brought on board to help the project, you can't expect them to function as a design build because that's also not how they're used to work.
Yeah. So let me explain kind of what you're saying in more detail. So like we've said, these types of design build companies or build design companies, they operate on efficiency. And that also means that's not just a benefit to clients. That also means for them, they have to be efficient. That's their business model.
And that's often why also the design portion and phases, when you hire a design build, are much shorter in time than a typical architect and GC route.
Yeah.
Because that time it's
wasted time for them.
They have to move quickly.
Yeah. And when you introduce anything that messes with their efficiency, they really do not like it because then they're losing money or they're not making as much money as they should. So what changes their process that would cause problems? To your point, the design processes are often super short in these design build practices, which is a big red flag. Like you just can't design and do documentation as quickly as they claim to be doing. It's not possible. And so if you're a client and you're particular and you're always asking for changes, that they very quickly the design build company very quickly becomes impatient because they don't want to do that. They want to get to construction because construction is where you make money. You don't really make a lot of money doing design and drafting. It's construction. The other way that it can really screw things up is if you hire an external architect. Like that's what happened with us. We took over the project from the architecture and design portion, and then that design build company, they became just the contractors. That is like the worst thing for a design build company because that really screws up everything for them, right? Because the architect is going to hold them to a much higher standard than they're used to. The architect is going to have their way of designing things that they're probably not used to. The architect's probably used to producing a much higher level of construction documents and being detailed through that, and want a very precise construction cost estimating or takeoffs based on the documents. And most design build companies are not set up to do any of that, right? So the way that design build companies are more efficient internally too is they take shortcuts. It's a shorthand, right? Because they know each other. So I don't need to draw this thing because I kind of know what it needs to be, and I don't need to detail it because I'm just going to do it in the field, and that's a large part of how they are efficient.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, we gave them, our design drawings that they actually, it was so bad, I have to say, that they actually copy-pasted our detailed drawings onto their title sheet and claimed that was their shop drawings. And information was missing. I'm like, look, okay, like, if you're going to use my drawing, at least keep the information that's on it, because you're missing half of it. So that's not even that good anymore. And also, I drew that. You didn't.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is a little bit of that. I think you're right. They also have like materials and details that they just repeat from job to job. So they're not reinventing the wheel. Their business model is not to be creative and create everything from scratch and new every project. Is to reuse as much as they've done on other projects and experience, and just kind of like carry on and move on to the next and the next and the next.
Yeah.
So it's a very different mindset. The construction administration portion of it too, like that's why it gets a little bit sticky, because if you go to one entity, there is basically no one else in the team but the client who's external to that entity, who can kind of like check and see if maybe they're doing something wrong or right? Like you cannot expect the company to admit when they've done something wrong. I mean, you should, but like let's say you do your final walkthrough through your house before you get your keys and the project is done, and there is a bunch of stuff that needs to be fixed. While as the client, you could do that and advocate for it, and good luck for finding the stuff that needs to be fixed and make sure you don't miss anything. But if you did go the traditional route, your architect would be doing that walkthrough with you and would make sure that those things are picked up and fixed. So there's a little bit of you have no advocate on your side to help you out during the process, because it's just you and that other entity. Yeah.
And the checks and balances that takes place during construction isn't just about the punch list or the final walkthrough. It happens throughout all of construction. So again, the traditional project delivery team method, the architect is visiting the site on a regular basis to check the contractor's work. We don't check it for safety and other things like that. We check it for design conformance, and we'll talk more about what that means in another recording. But the architect is there pretty often, and they're the ones that's checking the work. And that's important because the client, if you visit a site when it's under construction, you don't know what you're looking at. You can't tell if things are right or wrong, and you can't troubleshoot stuff either. So even though sometimes the architect-contractor relationship can become have some friction, right? And there's some challenges, and things get stressful in a project and whatever. That checks and balances system is very productive, even if it is difficult at moments, because it there's oversight on both sides of the architect and the contractor, and you have 100% trust and zero oversight in a design build process. You just have to believe that whatever they're doing is correct. And on that note, the thing that most people underestimate with buildings and even houses is the amount of decisions that is made, and the complexity of the buildings, and all the different corners and weird things that take place that have to be resolved, the number of problems that have to be resolved. And when you have the contractor and architect as separate people, all of these problems are talked about, because no one wants to do, like, the contractor doesn't want to just make an assumption and think like, well, it should probably be this way. The drawings aren't clear, or it's not drawn, or I'm not sure, but we're just going to do it. The contractor will not do that, or should not do that in the traditional team, because they know the architect's going to show up on site next week and be like, what happened here? And then they're going to be the architect will ask the contractor, you have to change this. This was not in the drawings, or just not whatever else, right? So a lot of the issues that come up during construction, which need to be resolved correctly in order for the house to turn out at a certain caliber in terms of design and quality, those are talked about when you have these two sides. When you don't have these two sides, and it's basically one team, one company, these are not really brought to the surface, and they're certainly oftentimes not brought to the attention of the client, right? Because if I'm out there with my team and we're all together, we'll just make it whatever we want. What are the chances the client's going to pay attention to this particular moment and care? A lot of design build practices are like, yeah, they probably won't know or care, so we're just going to move forward, because really they're buying into efficiency. Yeah. And then you end up in the end with something the client's oftentimes not happy with, because they're like, well, I didn't know it was going to be this. I didn't know it was going to be that. Or you end up with something that is just an inferior, kind of boring vanilla product anyway. And that does remind me that a lot of these design build practices, they are good at producing spec houses, generic spec houses. They're not good at custom homes. That's another way to kind of make a delineation between the two and what you're trying to achieve. If you want a truly custom home, design build, probably not for you.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because when you look at the range of design build firms that exist out there, yeah, you would rarely or maybe even never find one that does custom homes because, again, the level of design that it takes, from a business standpoint, probably doesn't make that much sense, right? Because you would still want to go through a traditional design process to get to the construction portion.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, why have a design built? Like it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, there's ways you can make the process more efficient. But if you go the custom route, like there is steps and time that you need to do those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another reason why design build is it's tricky for clients, but even for the professionals, is that so a lot of architects, they love construction and they would like to be design build because it's all the stuff that we've said, but it's also because they love construction. They like working through details and stuff. And there's plenty of contractors who love design. They want to be involved in design and do design. And that's great. And that kind of overlap is necessary for sure. However, architects and contractors are, again, fundamentally, they are very different professions and different sets of expertise. And the truth is, each of them is an art form on their own. And you can only really be an expert in architecture and design if you do 100% of your time, or most of your time, architecture and design. It's a craft. It's an art. You can't spend 50% of your time doing contractor stuff if you want to be a great architect. It doesn't work. Like there's not enough time in the world in the day to become really, really good, like high level architect. If you're out in the construction field dealing with material supply stuff and whatever else, again, half of your time, you need to focus on your craft. The same thing for a contractor, right? So there's inherent to these professions, because they are complicated professions. There's a limit to the ability of one person being able to do both equally. It's not a likely thing. So that's also why, if you come across either of those professionals, but let's say a contractor, and they're like, yeah, I design houses too. Well, a kid can design a house. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what are we talking about? Crayolas, or are we talking about a 10? Like you're hiring a legitimate licensed architect who has experience and does, all they do is design, right? And if they're a contractor, like truly a contractor, they're capped. They're just, unless they're the genius, they're the Frank Lloyd Wright, and they've just been the one in the 10 million people. No, they're not going to actually design a house for you. It's going to turn out like crap. I've seen so many houses that were designed built by contractors, and I asked the contractor, because I just met them, oh, so like who was the architect? Oh yeah, no, we designed it. That explains it. Yeah, because this is horrible. This is horrible. So,
I mean, it's the same thing as if an architect was going to build a house. It would probably not make much sense to them, right? Like I think
it would take forever.
It would take forever because they're perfectionists, but also, like, your brain is not wired the same way. Like, I mean, you could have a really strong interest and passion and love for that thing, but if you're not fully in it, and if you're not wired to think that way, like, you're probably just going to be mediocre at it. So how good is that, And
I also
think I can paint. I mean, I can paint.
Sure.
I could do paintings, and I could sell them on Etsy. Is that going to make me a Picasso? No. Are they any good or interesting? Probably not. Like, I think at some point it also goes back to the bigger topic, which is when people think they could do things themselves. Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of like in a similar. It's kind of like the same thing, but within our field, where other people within our field think that they could do the other person's job. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why it becomes a little bit. It's not healthy, and it doesn't bring much value, because you would be 10 times more valuable if you were incorporating a person that has that mastered that skill to be part of your team, rather than trying to emulate what they are doing, and you're not even doing it as well as when they first started. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. I think some of that, what you're describing, has to do with just who you are as an individual. Yeah. Again, kind of more the creative type versus not the creative type. It has to do with your experience and training and your education. It also has to do, like I said, with just the amount of time in the day. Like if you spend 8 hours every day, 9 hours every day, working and designing houses, you can become very good at that. If you spend half the time doing that, then you're not going to be as good as that. That's just, I think, the reality of it. I want to touch on your earlier point of custom houses aren't often done by design build companies. So I'll be even more specific and say what's interesting is that the really high-end custom house tier, right? Mm-hmm. The high-end tier, there are virtually no design build companies that operate at that tier. I'm talking about houses that are on the cover of magazines, that win architectural awards and or just phenomenal architecture, and they're also well built. They're not done by design build companies. And this is not just my opinion, I've spoken to a lot of professionals, architects and contractors about this, and a lot of the contractors who are extremely good at their jobs, and they work exclusively in this high-end space. There aren't design-build companies that do that.
I think it also comes down to the client.
Yeah.
And, let's say like they're, like what they can afford, basically. That's honestly what it comes down to. Someone who has like a lot of resources, they're going to want the best. Yeah. And efficiency is probably part of the process a little bit, but they want the best. And to get the best, they're just going to hire the best people to do it. So they're going to hire the best architect. They're going to hire the best contractor because they understand that
they're going to hire the experts.
They're going to hire the expert at that one thing.
Yeah.
They're not going to be looking for like a package deal. That's just not how they're wired. That said, like you have to have certain resources in order to do that and certain mindset and see the value of going that route.
Yep.
What we see a lot is that design build companies oftentimes operate at the lower tier of projects. And, smaller scope, suburban homes, people who don't necessarily have the means to spend, in hiring a bunch of consultants and big companies. So they just go kind of that route because it seems simpler, it's appealing, it seems cheaper. And I would guess that design build model probably came from a demand from those types of projects, because let's be honest, in certain scope, like the fees of those professionals just don't make sense for what people are looking to do.
Yeah.
So therefore, there is room for another type of business to exist to take on those types of projects, which is great. The thing is that, again, a lot of times, like those smaller design companies, design build companies who take on those small projects don't really give a shit about the project. And that's really what pisses me off is that, you should make those people's life and their project easier, simpler, and quicker. And good still.
Or just be transparent about it. I mean, no, of course, that's not going to happen. No one's going to say, like, I don't really care about design, or our design is less of a focus. They're not going to say that. I mean, the fact that design build in the mid and lower echelon or budget of projects has become a thing out of demand is an optimist perspective. It's also true that, frankly, from a business perspective, as a contractor, and you're trying to get work, architects are the way that contractors get work, like most of the time, right? And most of the time still, it's changed a little bit these days, but most of the time the architect is the first one hired, or the designer, one of the creatives. And then the client asks them for a recommendation for a contractor. Or a lot of times for us, they'll just say, just choose the contractor you want to use because I'm going to trust you for everything. And so from a contractor's perspective, right? If I want more business, I don't want to be relying on architects. And I think I have a good sense. I've done enough houses. I know like what paint colors to use. I know what trim should look like and whatever else. I'll just call myself a design build company, right? I'm a one-stop shop. I appeal to all these people because of all the obvious reasons. And I don't have to worry about this getting, work from an architect. I don't have to work with architects anymore who are always coming on site pointing at problems. I can just be design build. And so what I'm saying, it's a fantastic marketing tool.
Yeah.
So, ethos and ethics aside, just call yourself design build and just cast a wider net, right? And that is why a lot of contractors do that, because it works. It's a proven method. It works. And but obviously there are downsides. The other way that these design build companies can be more cost effective, and they are much cheaper than the traditional route sometimes. At other times, design build companies actually cost more because you're paying a premium for efficiency, and that's a very rare, but sometimes they are cheaper. But it's where, so how are design build companies able to charge less? It's because they're cutting out design, right? They're definitely not giving you a discount on materials. That's not the case. And the way they charge for the construction, the contractor portion is probably the same as every other contractor, but their design fee is where they chop it all out. So a normal architect at, not the most expensive architect, like just a normal architect will be about 10% of the project, 10% of the construction cost, okay? Construction cost means all the money it takes to build a house, materials, labor, and the overhead profit of the contractor. 10% of that goes to the architect. When you get to higher end architects, it goes up to 12, 15, 20%. So let's say it's like 12 to 15, something like that. That's the cost of an architect to do full architectural services, right? These design build companies, they'll do the architectural design for like, I don't know, a couple $1,000,
yeah.
like $6,000, $5,000. And clients are like, how's this? So wait, they're 10 times cheaper then? You want me to pay you, architect, 10 times more than what I'm going to pay them for their design fee? And
yeah, and that's where it's always good to kind of like understand what you're paying and what you're getting.
Yeah.
Okay, if you're going to charge me $2,000 to do the design for my project, what's the process going to be like? Are we going to have one meeting and you're going to do all the drawings, make all the selection, and that will be it? We're going to have conversation. Am I going to see options? Am I going to see 3D? Is it just going to be plans or like, crappy sketches? Are you going to help me select materials? Am I going to have to do that myself? What kind of materials? Are we working with stuff that you use on every single project? Or are we able to find things that suits me and my family? It's, it wouldn't make sense that you would get the whole deal, like the whole typical deal going the traditional route, going with a design build for such a tiny fraction of the price.
It's not possible.
Like, you can never buy a Lamborghini for the price of a Toyota. Like, why would anyone would make you that offer? They're hiding something. Like, the Lamborghini is just the exterior package and it's all made with Toyota pieces inside, what is the deal? People they're not gonna give you more than what makes sense for them as a business.
Yeah. And this is not a situation where the traditional architect is overcharging for the sake of overcharging.
No, you pay what you're getting what you're paying.
You get what you pay for. The average architecture process, there's, let's say, maybe a concept design, but there's schematic design, design development, permitting, construction documents, and then construction administration. There's all these steps, and they take time. And it's a funny thing because you have like really good architects, really expensive ones, and then ones that do solid good work. Let's say they're mid-level, but it's like really still good work and their fees are reasonable. These steps, the phases I've outlined and the rough steps are the same between them, right? And that's a way to communicate that you don't just like remove phases and remove stuff from the process and expect the same outcome. Architecture as a profession has been around for quite some time, and all of these phases exist, and these checkpoints exist, and these deliverables of specifications, renderings, floor plans, elevations, sections, et cetera, those exist for a reason too. Like, the profession has evolved to have these things, and the reason why it takes 10%, 12%, 15%, whatever of the construction cost as a chunk of money, and it has to be spent on an architect, is because that's what's required to do all these things. It's almost like physics, right? If you remove 9% or most of the architect budget, you're not going to get all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it causes problems. So one of the other things too, that's very different between these two routes is that with design build, as a client, you oftentimes do not understand or know or see the design of your house to the level of detail as you would if you worked with a standalone architect or designer.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we had people who call and be like, well, so I hired design build, framing is up, and I'm now realizing, what the room looks like, and that just doesn't work for me. And we're like,
I shouldn't be laughing.
And we're like, what? So you've never seen like a 3D view or anything? No, just a floor plan, and that was it. I'm like, man, you're in big trouble. Like, your house is framed. Like, you know, you gotta like undo a bunch of stuff, go back and fix it. And it's, you know, it really puts me in like a bad mood when I hear stories like that, because I'm like, how did anyone allow this to happen, to get that far along and not know? And you know, as a first-time client, you don't know what you're expecting. There is nowhere online on Wikipedia that tells you, okay, step 1, that's what's going to happen, because, you know, like everybody practices differently and there's no one way to go about it. And you don't know what you don't know, right? But yes, if you go the typical route with an architect and a contractor, the architect is going to show you a bunch of options. You're going to look at it in 2D and 3D, in floor plan, in perspective, with colors, with material samples. You know, you're going to maybe sometimes even take like a roll of blue tape and blue tape things on side to make sure that it makes sense to you, like your kitchen island size, or like are you okay with this wall being this high and doing this and that, and really being part of the process. And the architect wants you to be comfortable with all the decisions you're making. Like, what we don't want, and I think a contractor should not want that either, is a client to show up on site and be like, oh, what is that? You know, because that's not good. Unless like, wow, what is that? That's a better response. But you kind of want to do your due diligence in, let's say, the computer before you do it on site, because it's faster and cheaper to fix that in a drawing than fix it in real life 3D world. And that's kind of I think an issue with the design build too, is that the speed of things. You know, we talked about efficiency, and so things need to move really quickly when you do the design build style of project, right? Like, there's no time to be wasted. Like, things are moving quick. So you don't really have time to ponder or try different things or think about it or consider different options. It's more like we have a goal that we got to get to, and we got to get it there, you know, pretty quickly. And, you know, you could argue that sometimes if you go with a traditional architect, things can take a little bit longer than you thought because of those reasons as well. So there's kind of a fine balance to find there. But I think that a client oftentimes, especially if it's their first project, needs time to think about things. Especially if it's, let's say, their forever home or it's their only home, you know, like, you don't want to have to do that twice. You don't want to have to do it again. You don't want to make the wrong decision and regret it later, because it's a lot. It's a lot of, you know, your mental space and time taken. It's a lot of resources. It's a lot of things to consider. So you want to make sure you're making the right choice. And I think that time is necessary in the decision-making process. And, you know, the design build is oftentimes like, we got to get to construction. So it's rushing.
Well, so there's a couple of things. The first is that one of the biggest differences in general is the amount or lack of transparency in the design build model, right? Things, budgets, schedules, designs, everything becomes much more transparent generally in the traditional architect contractor route. In the design build route, a lot of these things that I've mentioned, they're just kind of hidden, and you don't really see them as a client unless you request them. So what's a specific example? The construction cost. In the traditional project delivery method, the architect does all the construction documents, and then those are used by the contractor to price the project or bid on the project, but to produce an accurate as possible construction cost breakdown. In the design build process, like almost all the time, there are no construction documents, right? They use a very lightweight set of design drawings or permit drawings, which are nowhere close to the same thing, and they build off of that. So, and just for reference, like a lightweight design drawing set might be 1/10 the amount of information as in a construction document set, a proper construction document set. So what does that mean? That means you as a client are not seeing a detailed breakdown of the costs of your house before it starts being built. Now, in my view, if I were a client, I would like to know where my money is going before we start tearing down my house or putting in the foundations and whatnot.
I mean, you can, but to be honest, if you have no idea what those numbers mean, like, he won't really speak to you, right?
Now, in a lot of design build practices, they will tell you the cost, and they can better guarantee it because they've done this type of design many times before. So that's the costs are like better controlled. But if you're the type of person, you're like, well, I'd like to actually know where my money is going, like how much is going toward the tile person, toward the tile versus the wood flooring versus the windows. Like, I'd like to know. That's oftentimes not really there in design build. Obviously, they do have that information because they're ordering the materials and paying people, but they aren't keeping track. It's not the same thing, right? It's like accounting. Why would I keep track of my accounting if I don't have to show it to anybody, right? As long as I know in the end, on average, over the course of X projects, I'm making good money, then I don't really care to keep detailed track per project of all of these. I don't need to, right? And that's the kind of gray area that exists with design build. That also means when we look at these two different types of documentations that are being used to produce the building, that in construction, instead of the on-site builders looking at the construction document saying, okay, this is dictating what I'm building, they don't have that, right? Because they've shortcutted the architecture process and the documents. They only have this permit drawing set or this lightweight design set, which doesn't tell them exactly what they need to do. So they look at that and they go, okay, well, seems like maybe it could be this, and they just kind of make something up on site, right?
Right.
And you can argue there's pros and cons to both. But again, the first thing is client doesn't know what it's going to be if it's not drawn. They haven't seen it, right? The other issue is that if the client doesn't understand what's being built beforehand, and you are a worker on site and you kind of make up a detail because you can assume what the detail is going to be based on this loose, weak design drawing, and you do it, the client comes on site and doesn't like it, you have to redo it. And then, like you said, that's more costly than just doing it in a drawing.
Yeah, having someone spending an hour to figure it out. The interesting thing with the budget and the cost of things too is that, yes, I think for anything that you buy in general, you want to know like what is part of that price. Like you need to. I mean, I would want to. Like you need to know the breakdown. But we worked on a project where we jumped in to help with the design aspect of it, and after the design was done, the design build company like provided an estimate of the cost, and it was like way above what it needed to be, right? So if you just have the design build company and you're like, yeah, this is too much, I can't spend that much. Okay, well, let me reduce the price, and they reduce the price. You don't really know how the price has been reduced or what's been taken out. In our case, what we were able to do is see the breakdown of things and just kind of like move the numbers around and without sacrificing on the design. Well, maybe, yeah, we could go with a cheaper tile, or maybe we don't do that here, but we keep that there, or maybe like this, this line item gets removed so we can do this thing in this space that makes a lot more sense and it's more important for the project. If you don't have that design understanding and that vision of the project, those numbers are just numbers. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really tell you anything as to like, okay, you're going to be saving, $10,000 on your estimate, but you have no idea what that $10,000 has been taken out, because numbers just don't disappear. Like scope, something has been removed from that spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, you want to know, what is it? Am I getting like shitty doors from Home Depot now?
Yeah.
Or, are we just removing one window in a bathroom that nobody's going to use?
Yeah.
And therefore, I could have like the nicer doors everywhere. Or like, I don't think that dialogue very much happened in design build, because again, it's more like crunching numbers, moving quickly, and
that's also, I think you're also describing kind of the other side of the architect's brain, the other personality of an architect, which is one who's like very detailed and fastidious and like just kind of OCD about stuff. Like, we don't like things that are unaccounted for, and we love knowing things in advance. That's because that's what we do. We draw stuff for things to be built. So referring back to the other project you had talked about, where we designed the thing, that we ended up working with that design build, the previous or current design build company who stayed on as a contractor. I'm recalling now that one of the things that happened is that we did the construction documents and we're like, okay, give us a construction cost of this, and gave us one number, and we were like, can you give us a breakdown of like where the money is going. And it's not just because the client's interested to know how much tile costs. It's more so that we can adjust the design if we need to spend less money and more money in certain places as it makes sense to toggle it, right? That's what always happens. And man, it was so hard to get a detailed construction cost from these people. I'm like, don't you know how much your material, like, give me the Excel. Like, what is give me the Excel sheet. Give me the sheet that breaks down the cost of all the stuff. Then I can look at it and we can talk about with you and with the client, okay, this is the thing that's costing a bit much. So I think we can figure that out and bring that down a little bit. Or this is a lot, but this is a key thing. There's not really a lot of other options. So we should keep this, like whatever that ends up being, right? But you can't have that kind of conversation. You can't make that kind of analysis. You can't make that recommendation as an architect if you don't know the breakdown. And
I think that's also like where, like in the traditional route where you have the architect and the GC, the pre-construction services are probably I wouldn't say a smarter attempt, but a close attempt to do like what a design build does, right? Like you make sure you're preserving everybody's skills, but also you're working out through these numbers very early on in the design phases, because that's really where you can, like we were talking about, like you can tweak how much of the budget is allocated to what and help us design more efficiently to fit that budget, and also have the contractor know, like what absolutely needs to stay, what can we change, get his suggestions, because sometimes they have, good ideas on how to make the cost of construction more efficient.
Yeah.
They're more accustomed than architects with costs of material and labor.
Yeah.
So they know how much resources it's going to take to do that one thing. And that's very much a dialogue that you need, right?
That is the benefit. If you haven't listened to our recording about Preconstruction, then you should do so now. That is the massive benefit of pre-con and why we are huge advocates of Preconstruction, and we use it for basically all the projects. I don't want to do a project without pre-con. I'm not interested in that because it just leads to problems. I'd also say that it's interesting because of the experiences we've had, I guess sort of by luck, is that we are more accustomed to being involved and working with the contractor at a level that most architects don't. Like we're very okay with getting in the nitty gritty of not just like construction details and executing, but the costs of things. And some architects, they're very clear. Like my job is I design, I do the documents. The contractor is in charge of pricing, schedule, construction. So if you have any questions about construction costs, don't ask me, ask the contractor. If it comes in over budget, then yeah, I can deal with it. But that's not that's not the mentality we take. I think out of, because I don't find it to be productive, as also because we've had to work with design build companies. So we're just used to like looking at detailed construction costs and but a lot of the conversations we have, I feel like regarding the cost of items and substituting items and other stuff is again, not the average architect.
I mean, a lot of architects do VE, once it gets the bid and say, okay, we got to switch this for that and go cheaper here and take that out and take that out.
Yeah, but it's kind of like because they have to do it, so they're going to do it. You know what I mean? Like, and not part of the process.
And I think it is important for architects to understand how much some of those things cost to build, because it does inform you as you design, putting things in perspective for later on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I'm not saying that we're like the only ones that do. There's plenty of offices who operate in the way we do. But again, if we're talking about different types of architects, right? A lot practice differently. And like I said, there are some who are just, I do the drawings and then that's it. I'm not responsible for anything else.
But when you are passionate about the design and you want your client to get the design that they loved and they approve, you're going to find the ways to make sure that they get it. And sometimes it just means like being a bit more efficient, a bit smarter, tweaking the details a little bit, to make it happen. The lazy route is just to take it out. It's kind of like, well, how good is that? We designed something great, the client loved it, and it's too expensive. Okay, take it out. No, like there must be a way that it could stay there. Just approach it from a different angle and make it work. Like we're problem solvers, and taking something out is not solving the problem. It's just removing the problem.
So, do you have any other big issues with design and build or things that you've seen?
No, my biggest issue is that oftentimes the design is shit, and that's really my like. Look, if you have a design build and you do great work and you have actual architects and designers and people with expertise, then please bring your name forward because I think maybe we should hear more about those practices.
I don't want people to reach out because people reach out and they say, "Oh, look at my design. What do you think?"
No,
It's don't ask me that question. It's like if you invite me to your house and I didn't design it, and you're like, "What do you think of my house?" And don't ask me. It's just, I'm. There's the chances that I'm gonna honestly feel like I should praise the house are just it's not very high. So don't ask me. I don't want to be put in that position.
My biggest issue, I think, it's the level of design and services, and the fact that people think that they're giving people this amazing thing, and no, it's not. And a lot of it.
So yeah, go ahead.
And a lot of it just reminds me of all of those like remodel TV shows you see on TV with bad stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, can we please elevate everybody's life and just do things that are nice, are good quality, are off the shelf, that we can all buy in bulk?
So let me ask you a different question, kind of summarizing or wrapping this up, I suppose. What type of person would be a good fit for a design build company? The average design build company, which is one that's more, led by a contractor and they don't really have good design services or hardly any at all.
Look, you have a house in the suburb and you're looking to add a small bedroom for your kid.
Mm-hmm.
And your house is like a typical suburban house and you don't have millions of dollars you can spend and you're not really interested in making it, anything unique, then fine. Like, you're probably better off hiring a design build than just a contractor because at least they probably have some sensitivity to picking up material, doing an okay layout, doing some drawings, right? Versus a guy in a van that's just going to show up with the stuff and start building without having a plan. So, that's probably safe. If you're looking to make it like your dream house, your forever home, the thing where you're going to invest everything you have in it, probably don't do that.
Yeah.
Like, give yourself some option and time to think and make sure you hire the right people.
People could be thinking, well, I can start with design build, and if the design is not going well, I'll pivot and then hire an architect or whatever else, and I can still use that design build company as a contractor. And as you said earlier, the first issue with that is that it's really difficult to let people go, even if it's only for a part of their services. It's just like it never happens when it's supposed to happen. It always happens late, right? For everybody. It's like human nature. We think we can make it work and we're like, but we're really close and they did okay the last time, and you make up all these kind of excuses to like prolong this relationship when probably at your core, it would be better if we didn't have them. And that cutoff just doesn't happen often, or it doesn't happen on time, because there's that fear. Again, I'm jumping off the cliff once more. I have to find someone else. I don't know how that's going to go. It might go just as bad. So now you're thinking, well, the next person, maybe they'll be, if they're just as good or just as bad as this one, then I'm just going to keep working with this one and all these things, right? So I think that's the first issue. The second, as I said, per our example, the design build companies, they don't want to be designers and they don't want to be contractors. They want to be on their own, doing their own thing in the field. Don't bother me. That's the other good pairing between these design build companies and clients. If you're a client who's is going to be very, very hands off, that's an ideal client for these design build companies. They're like, just give me some direction, point me that way and let me do my thing. I'll tell you the price and then we're done. Don't come to the site. Don't ask me about different colors of white. Don't ask me about breakdowns of construction. Don't ask me anything. Just let me do my thing and then I'm out. If that's truly where you're at, then yeah, that could work. I wouldn't like go with design build thinking you can pivot and then hire a separate architect.
No, it's going to cost you more time and money in the end, honestly.
Yeah. And also the time, money, and then stress. And that third thing, stress, is something that a lot of clients underestimate. They think that I can tough it out. Well, I've been through stressful things before. I have a very stressful job. I know what it means to project manage. I know. And look, that might be true, right? If you're successful or even not, you might have worked in situations where you're used to these kinds of issues. But design and construction tend to be a higher level of stress than people realize. And also you're doing that potentially on top of your your normal job, your 9 to 5, 9 to 6, 9 to 9, or whatever it is. And so oftentimes when people get through projects and it was stressful, if you ask them, would you have paid another 10% more, 5% more of the total project cost, which is a chunk, to not have all the problems you had? They most of the time will say, I would have gladly done that. It wasn't worth, the gray hairs.
Yeah, and I think also like if you're doing this construction project, it's because you're excited about the final outcome. And you want to make sure that you're happy with that final outcome. And I don't think you want to, stain your feeling or appreciation for it because the experience was terrible. So preserve yourself from a terrible experience by making the right choices from the beginning.
I totally agree. The last thing I'll say to summarize this whole thing is that design build as an idea is not a bad thing, right? And it could work extremely well. I know it can. It's just that, again, it's more of a philosophical difference between architects and contractors and whoever's starting it, right? The motivation is the why. The motivation of doing what you're doing is different. And that's actually what it comes down to, is that alignment in motivations between the company and the client. And if you are a client, then that's something you have to look out for.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the concept of design build sounds great, but I think the design and the build aspect of the business needs to be equally weighed and pushed forward.
Yeah.
Like if it gets imbalanced, one takes the lead over the other side, like it's gonna cause problems. You're gonna be losing somewhere.
Yeah. I also say, and this is a criticism of some of the architect-led design build companies, that I won't name anybody, but even the ones that are well-known and are kind of the high caliber, like legitimate design build, let's say, I find their work to be kind of lackluster over the course of the years that they've been practicing. It's become more and more kind of just generic, boring stuff. And it makes me, it just is purely theory, it makes me think that they have allowed the practicalities and the pragmatic aspects of construction to bleed over in their design thinking too much.
Yeah.
Like in their concept schematic design phases, I don't think they're loose enough. I don't think they're actually questioning and being as creative as they once were or could be, because they're too preoccupied with the feasibility of stuff.
Yeah. I think it comes again from that efficiency process model. I think at some point it just takes out a portion of the creativity because you have all those systems you have to respond to and apply and obey by,
Yeah, because when you design something that's different, it's going to cause challenges. That's like the nature of it, right? And it's very easy, I think, for a person to, if they know it's going to cause problems and they know, well, we could do it this way, it's going to cause less problems, to just go that other path, right? Because you're going to make just as much money. You're still going to get as many clients as before. So, like, why not do that?
Yeah, so basically we didn't really sell the design build to people very much. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of people unhappy by this recording, but,
But nothing we've said was not true. This is what we see day in, day out.
Those are not things that we're fabricating, from air. Like, these are things that we've seen and honestly too many times. So that's that.
Yeah, and so if you're someone listening and you disagree, let us know. If you agree, let us know. If you're a client and you're unsure and you're confused about something or have a question, let us know. And you can find us through our email, which is hello@secondstudiopod.com. You can find us through Instagram. Second Studio Pod is the handle. Or you can text our hotline, which is 213-222-6950. We spent a lot of time thinking and talking about design build, the pros and the cons. In part because we've had to work with design build companies and we've seen a lot of them. So that's why we're doing this recording. But if you like what we're doing and you want to support us, you like our show in general, then you can leave us a review. That's a great way to support us. You can leave a review in the Apple Podcast app. Also, all the other apps for podcasts, Spotify. I don't know if you can leave a review, but you can rate and subscribe. And on YouTube, you can like, subscribe, share, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, what else?
That's it. You said it all.
We have a website, Second Studio Pod. You can go on there and see all 400 episodes. And that's it. Yeah, so let us know your thoughts. Have you had a design build experience? Did it go well? Did it go bad?
All right, talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.